I lost my wallet in Cuba, and Boris, a local guide and a complete stranger, let me borrow $300. The generosity of the people in Cuba was amazing. I'm Josh from Active Tours, and today I want to revisit a trip I did in late 2019 to Cuba. While there, I visited the cities of Havana and Vinales. So this list only talks about the things that I did in those two places. Number 1. Horseback riding in Vinales. By far, my favorite activity while visiting Cuba was horseback riding in Vinales. It checked off a number of boxes when I was dreaming up a trip to Cuba. First, horseback riding. I grew up riding horses, so I had a little bit more comfort than some of the people on the trip. When our guide asked if I wanted a calm horse or a loco horse, I told him mucho loco, and he laughed and he handed me mojito. He told me that Mojito was the horse that he rides for the local competitions here in Vinales. He also said that Mojito had to ride in the back of the pack because he would kick the other horses. Mojito was my bud, and I convinced the guide to let me gallop for a few hundred feet. That was super fun. It was pretty amazing. Next, we took a dip in a local lake. It's super hot and humid in Cuba, so it was a refreshing break. After that, we went over to the tobacco plantation. We got to see how the plant was grown, dried, and eventually hand-rolled into cigars. It was really cool to see the process, and yes, I did smoke a cigar, even though I have really no interest in smoking in general. But when you're in Cuba, you smoke a cigar. These cigars were made right here, and I felt compelled to buy them directly from the farmers as gifts for my friends and family. Don't expect them to be cheap, they're pretty pricey. Finally, you end the trip with a feast, probably the best meal in Cuba that I had. Not only that, but Boris, the owner of the tour guide, and his mom here, a complete stranger, let me borrow $300. That's equivalent to 10 months' pay for an average Cuban citizen. I can't say enough about Boris and his wonderful mother. I'm going to do a video series on travel stories coming up, and this will be one of the featured stories. Go to the community section of my YouTube channel to vote on which story you want to hear first. I highly recommend Boris as your horseback riding guide in Vinales. I'm going to put all of the links below to the tours I did on this trip. Number 2, rock climbing in Vinales. Now, one of the main reasons I even wanted to come to Cuba was to climb in Vinales. I had seen some amazing images in Rock Climber magazine forever ago, and it put it on my adventure to-do list. I traveled to Cuba solo, and I didn't really have a lot of time to figure out climbing partners. I hired a guide on Airbnb. It worked out perfectly, and it was a great peace of mind for me that I already had an established climbing partner. I met my climbing guide Adrian at his house, and we headed out to the climbing location, which was a short 15 to 20 minute walk from this place. It was pretty epic climbing, and I highly recommend you hire Adrian. All in all, I think I did about 7 climbs up to a 5.11D, which I didn't quite make it to the top of. Whether you like it or not, the crag always has a way of leaving a project for the next trip. Number 3, Plaza de la Revolución. It's a huge square surrounded by government buildings. The square is notable for being where many political rallies have taken place, including political figures like Fidel Castro. The Jose Marti Memorial is beautiful, and the faces of Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos are always ever present. It's a great place to learn a little bit about Cuban history, and hopefully you hired a local guide to tell you a little bit about Cuba's turbulent past. I imagine if you didn't hire a guide, this place is probably just Instagram worthy and kind of stark, but I recommend hiring a guide and digging a little bit deeper into the history and putting down the camera. There's also a lot of classic cars lined up on the side here waiting to take you on a ride to see the other top sights in Havana. Speaking of classic cars, number 4, ride in a classic car. It's almost up there with smoking Cuban cigars. Due to the embargo that expanded to include almost all exports in 1962, Cuba has kind of lived in a frozen state with regards to the US goods, that is. Some of the world's best mechanics live in Cuba and have been constructing their own parts for these classic cars built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The truth is, you'll see plenty of other cars built in this current decade from other countries, but it's the classic American cars that demand the highest taxi rate for tourists wanting to live the iconic Cuban experience. Something that I find really interesting is Cuba is in a bit of an upside down triangle economically. Your highly skilled doctors, lawyers, and dentists get paid far, far less than those driving taxis. Which is why I met so many doctors, lawyers, and dentists driving taxis. It's a fascinating culture, and so many of the people I met here were happy to tell me about their daily life. Pro tip: once you find out that taxis are the most expensive thing in Cuba, you can quickly try and figure out a way to save money. There are these group taxis that the locals ride. A trip across town maybe costs you $5 instead of $30. It's kind of like an Uber share. If you know the make, model, and year of these cars, put a timestamp in the comment below. Number 5, a bike tour in Havana. Now in the States, I booked this trip around Havana on Airbnb. I'm a big cycle enthusiast and I really love seeing big cities on two wheels. This bike tour started in Vedado and we traveled around to a number of different sites on this tour. Also, it was far from where I was staying, so it was great to ride around with some new friends to a few other historical sites. Number 6, get the local currency and try the local food. Now, culture through eating food is a must when I'm traveling. You'll notice that there are two distinct food classes in Cuba, as well as two different currencies. The CUC for tourists and the CUP for locals. The CUP is worth a 25th of the tourist CUC. I recommend you go into the bank and trade some CUC for some CUP and try the local food. Hopefully you're not super confused. I will say it's not the tastiest food in the world, but it does give you a feel for how little money these people in Cuba live on and how poor the ingredient quality is. Regardless, for me, it's all about culture, and food and culture is extremely important. My favorite local foods were the panini pressed Cubano sandwiches and the street pizza I got in Vinales. That was super bomb. Number 7, listen to music and dance with the locals. So much of Cuban culture and the vibe can be found for their love of music and dance. I think music is one of those things that is so warm and welcoming. And since I was traveling solo, anytime I traveled and heard music, I made a beeline straight for that source. Grabbing a cheap drink and dancing with the locals and tourists was one of my all-time favorite things in Cuba. I highly recommend it. I traveled there around Christmas, so there were a ton of block parties and festivals, but I bet there are places to go dance and salsa dancing and enjoying the music every night with the locals. Number 8, a walking tour of Old Havana. Now, one of the best intros to a city in general all over the world is a walking tour with a local guide. I signed up for this free, tips recommended of course, a walking tour of Old Havana. Our guide really helped explain a lot of the history and showed us a number of the historical buildings in the area. He also helped us ground ourselves in the way of life in Cuba. He talked about the economic reverse triangle and that he went to university to study journalism but makes way more money working as a walking guide. Number 9, watch a baseball game. Now, I was traveling to Cuba during the holidays when none of the baseball leagues had games, but I was lucky enough to catch a local game in Vinales. Super exciting. And the excitement of the crowd and the players made this seem like it was a playoff environment. Number 10, Hotel Nacional de Cuba. The Hotel Nacional de Cuba is a historic Spanish-style hotel in Havana, Cuba. It opened in 1930 and is located on the seafront of the Vedado district. It stands on a hill offering commanding views of the sea and the city. The area is steeped with history of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I found it fascinating to read all of the propaganda surrounding that historical event from the reverse angle. There are a number of bunker tunnels that you can walk around and explore, and if you're looking for authentic and very expensive Cuban cigars, you can get them here. My research to this day looks like you can stay at this hotel. I'm assuming you can buy the cigars here, but please do your own due diligence as regulations change all the time. I posted a link in the description for the restricted hotels in Cuba for US citizens. Number 11, follow Enist Hemingway's advice. Now, Hemingway was once quoted as saying, "My mojito in Bodeguita del Medio and my daiquiri in Floridita." And so you must in fact go and travel in his footsteps. Hemingway lived in Cuba on and off for over 30 years. I will say that mojitos are probably my favorite drink of the two, and Bodeguita claims to be the birthplace of the mojito. I do think that Floridita was probably my favorite vibe. They had live music every night and the crowd was super excited. I met a couple of friends from Seoul, Korea here, and we had a great time exploring the area with them that night and also my last night in Cuba. Number 12, a Cuban cooking class. Now, I've taken cooking classes all over the world in Spain, Bali, Colorado, and now in Cuba. I highly recommend that you take the time to learn about the Cuban food and the care that goes into it. The class was booked through Airbnb, and again, I recommend that you book these in advance because you won't be able to book them once you're in Cuba. Our teacher was super serious. She corrected our mistakes with grunts and glares, and it was super funny. So basically, I proceeded to try to make her smile the entire cooking class. Leave a comment below with the places you've taken a cooking class. Number 13, the jazz club La Zorra El Cuervo. A red phone booth at street level leads you down to this intimate subterranean lounge with live jazz music bands. The venue is a tad small, so I recommend getting there around an hour early to get a seat and listen to some of the finest musicians in the world. The entrance fee includes 2 drinks of your choice, but I recommend the classic Cuba Libre at this venue. They were delicious, and it was an unforgettable experience to be here, and I think it would definitely be a highlight on your trip as well. Number 14, the National Capitol Building and the Grand Theater of Havana. Now, the first night I got to Cuba, I took a walk down to the Grand Theater of Havana and the National Capitol Building. There was so much lively music happening all around here. It was amazing to see all of the old classic cars lined up on the street. It was exactly what I was hoping for in my first few hours of Cuba. There was live music everywhere, plenty of excitement with the holidays around the corner as well. The National Capitol Building was completed in 1929 and was modeled off of the White House. The Grand Theater of Havana was built in 1924, and it's home to the Cuban National Ballet. Okay guys, that was my list of the best things to do in Cuba. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment below, and subscribe to my channel. Remember, I have a poll in my channel right now asking which travel story you want to hear. I could give you guys this Cuba story where I lost my wallet, the time that I saved one of my best friend's lives in Alaska, the time in Myanmar when we got lost and asked for directions and got taken on a 3-day trip to grandma's house, or when I was cycling in New Zealand and my family thought I was under an earthquake that happened in Christchurch. I cannot wait to find out what story you guys want to hear. Again, I'm Josh from Active Tours. I'll talk to you guys soon.